Hi everyone, Alex Tardy here, National Weather Service. Unfortunately, we're looking at more Santa Ana winds and high fire danger. Doesn't mean there'll be new fires, but the conditions will be very dry with more offshore flow gusts continuing. Mostly dry weather, prolonged Santa Ana winds through mid-January. Let's look at some of the details here. Here's a summary. Socal is now the driest start to the water year. More Santa Ana winds, offshore northeast flow. Doesn't mean more fires, but it does mean that humidity will be very low, fuel moisture is critical, and with the winds, if there is a fire start, the behavior could be extreme. Less wind later next week, but some of the offshore flow continues. There's uncertainty with any precipitation, and we'll talk about that and why. Okay, here are the current incidents going on, courtesy of CAL FIRE. Several large wildfires still burning, including the Palisades and Eaton in the LA basin. Now, so far, we've been able to escape starts and fires. All the fires have been small in the area to the east and south, including Riverside, San Diego. Now, some of the leftover smoke, and you can see there's an app and location here where you can get information for smoke. Is going to drift across the area as we get lighter winds, as shown here coming up. Driest water year on record, dating back to 1850. It's listed here on the right. A lot of locations in SoCal are 5% of their normal precipitation. So a lot of times people ask me, is this unusual? Well, yes, 5% record driest is very unusual. It's never happened before. Across the region, you can see there's a lot of ones. A lot of ones mean they are in first place for the driest start to a rainy season, as shown here. Let's take a look at some winds. Here are the winds that occurred on Thursday, January 9th. I pointed some arrows of some really intense winds that occurred, including the 76 at Ontario Airport. Now, as the Santa Ana wind pushed down into San Diego County, here's some of the gusts we saw Thursday night and Friday morning across the area. The I-8 corridor, which is a typical windy area in Santa Ana, had most of the strongest winds. Some of the wind made it all the way to the I-15 corridor, as shown here. It really depends on where you are with Santa Ana winds. The strongest winds typically are confined to the canyons and gaps and the foothills. And here's a look at northern San Diego County off of Palomar Mountain, how some of those winds occurred on Friday, January 10th, and how localized they were. Now, northern areas, the Inland Empire, on Friday, January 10th, winds were a little more widespread, and we typically see that across the Inland Empire, that winds are not necessarily the strongest, but they're more widespread in gusts across the Inland Empire. Let's take a look back, though. On January 7th, what kind of winds did we have? This was the start of the Santa Ana winds, and you can see they were really intense, not only widespread, and look how they're confined to the foothills. That's a classic signature for Santa Ana winds, where the most dangerous winds are along the 210 and northward. But a lot of places were windy, as shown here. Even a wind gust 103 marked on here in the Cajon Pass. Now, the highest winds across the Cajon Pass on January 8th are shown here. We had as high as 98, as shown here in the Cajon Pass, but a lot of places in the 70s. Now, as we moved into January 8th, some of those stronger winds shifted over the Santa Ana Mountains. Look at the 94 and the 81 Chino Hills. That 94 was in Fremont Canyon. But a lot of places gusted in the 50s and 60s and even some pockets of 70s. But it really depends on where you are located, your proximity to the mountain that's upstream where those winds are coming from. That makes a big difference. On January 8th, we also had some strong gusts of 86 in the Santa Ana Mountains. But as you can see, they gradually decreased as you went down the mountain, okay? but still a lot of places 50s and 60s. Now in San Diego County, we largely caught a break on January 8th, but we did have some really strong winds up around 80 in the Palomar Mountain region as shown here. Down in the San Diego corridor, the winds were not as strong as what we saw on January 10th. So this is showing January 8th on Wednesday. Okay, how dry has the air been? Well, I'm showing an example here of minimum humidity. I can feel how dry the air is in my throat. January 10th, we had a lot of humidity around 9, 10, 11%, even some places as low as 5% as shown here. So the humidity is a factor of the air temperature and how much moisture is in it. And when you keep wind over these areas, wind coming from the deserts, you can get these really low humidities all the way to the coast. This is the weather pattern over the next few days. So coming on Sunday, the next round of Santa Ana winds. What's causing it? Another system going by to our east. The jet stream is the white line I show on the left-hand side. The high to low pressure that we talk about, that's shown on the right-hand side. And you can see high to low north winds across California as shown here, digging into Southern California on Sunday. So this is the next round of Santa Ana winds. Very similar weather pattern. Now for Sunday, Monday, what happens to that surface high pressure area? Well, it moves as it normally does west to east over into Utah. And we still keep that offshore flow gradient even on Monday as shown here. Now what about the rest of the week? This is when it gets difficult because the weather is buckling in the atmosphere. So the jet stream, look at the bend. An upper low is forming along the eastern Pacific. So when we get such buckling and storm systems breaking away from the jet stream, they kind of meander around and do what they want to do. At the surface Wednesday, we're still seeing some of that offshore flow, but it's weaker. So this weather pattern here makes things really challenging. The good news is we get warming over the Great Basin, so that weakens that offshore flow. The bad news is that upper low just meanders around, and that makes for high uncertainty for any precipitation chances. This is what we're looking at for the weekend. So for Saturday night and Sunday, the red areas are the most critical areas that we're looking at. Doesn't mean there'll be fires, but the combination of dry fuel, record dry start, very low humidity, and return of Santa Ana winds. This is what a fire weather watch, which would be upgraded to a red flag warning in normal situation, looks like. The strong winds, you don't need 80 mile per hour winds to have erratic fire behavior. Even 35 mile per hour gusts will do it. Very low humidity like we're seeing today, below 20%. Of course, it's got to be dry. The vegetation has to be dry. And if you do get ignition, you can have extreme fire behavior. The Santa Ana Wildfire Threat Index issued by the U.S. Forest Service is showing the same thing. Critical conditions, or the moderate Santa Ana index, for Sunday through Tuesday, all areas. The vegetation is very dry as shown here. It's now approaching record levels. This is a direct result of the conditions we've seen with the record dry, #1 driest start to a water year. Now keep in mind we have a lot of vegetation, brush, and fuel because the past 2 winters have been very wet. And now we're looking at a condition where the winter is the driest start ever. Here are the wind gusts potential that we're looking at. You can see it's a pretty classic signature with northeast winds and the wind corridors from the Cajon Pass I-15 all the way down to the Santa Ana Mountains. And lesser winds, so not as high of an impact, less but still elevated fire danger all the way down to San Diego. What about the temperatures for this weekend? Well, they're right around normal for most areas, a little bit cooler than what we've seen recently. So that helps a little bit with the relative humidity, with temperatures getting up in the 40s in the mountains and approaching 70 for the coast and valleys. What about the humidity? Well, instead of seeing 7 or 8% like we saw Friday, we're still below 20%. So still critically dry on Sunday. Rain chances. We looked at that formation of a stalled weather system and that buckled jet stream. Doesn't give us much hope for precipitation. And so the latest outlook in the extended period beyond 6 days is still not just for Socal, but for the West Coast, looking drier than normal, with the wet conditions focused along the Gulf Coast and parts of the Rockies and Plains. Here are some resources you can use, including checking out the latest weather alerts, such as the red flag products, the fire weather watch that was issued on Friday. The maps that I showed you, you can also create those in terms of where the strongest winds were, where the lowest humidity is, and some of the outlooks are available at these links here as well. We always post on Facebook and also on X. So if you're looking for more information, check out there. Be safe, everyone. Have a plan. We are still in the midst of high fire danger. We're still in a dry, persistent Santa Ana wind pattern until early to mid next week. So please, if you don't already, have a plan. Just because you didn't get a fire from the recent Santa Ana wind events doesn't mean one cannot occur and get out of control. All right, stay safe, everyone. Good luck.